Alright, so as Dr. Richabich just said, my name is Taylor Yoder. I am a double major in psychology and Spanish here at the university. And my research investigated the potential interaction between conformity and church beliefs and whether that interaction was significant in predicting individuals' attitudes to identify as Christians toward gays and lesbians. The entire course of our history has included prejudice towards sexual minorities. This is known. A single mention of the Westboro Baptist Church triggers media memories of individuals holding huge signs chanting "God hates fags." Furthermore, since the legalization of same-sex marriage in 2015, there have been numerous cases of prejudice and discrimination against sexual minorities committed by people who identify as religious. So what do you know about attitudes? There are a lot of predictors of negative and positive attitudes that have already been established in previous research. For example, some predictors of negative attitudes are having more conservative religious ideals as well as being less educated. Also, men tend to be more homophobic than women do. On the other hand, some predictors of positive attitudes are holding more liberal ideologies, knowing someone who is gay or lesbian, having some contact with them, whether that be a friend or a family member or a coworker, as well as attributing same-sex attraction to a biological cause and not a choice. And despite the great amount of evidence that we have on predictors, there has been no evidence that has been established to link conformity and whether or not conformity is a potential correlate of predicting attitudes. So what is conformity theory? Conformity theory is a change in behavior or belief as a result of real or imagined group pressure. So an individual may change his or her belief or action because he thinks everyone around him wants him to, or because they're actually putting social pressure on him. And this was developed by Falomir-Pichastor a long time ago with his famous line study. So in this study, there's a group of Confederates and one participant, and even when the Confederates said what the length of the line was, so example right here, the participant knows what the answer is when asked, what is the length of the line? When the Confederates say the wrong answer, the participant conforms to the wrong answer, even though he knows the right answer. This is because of the real or imagined pressure that he is experiencing. Furthermore, there has been some previous researchers who propose that conformity could be a potential correlate for predicting attitudes, but there's been no established research. So with conformity theory in mind, my first hypothesis was that Christians who have a higher propensity to conform would be more likely to adopt the attitudes of their churches rather than people who have a lower propensity to conform. But with conformity theory in mind and knowing that individuals conform to those around them, there's also a potential that Christians with the higher propensity to conform may be less likely to adopt the attitudes of their church because of other attitudes around them, not from their church. So in order to investigate this, I had 58 participants who responded that they identified as Christian and attended church regularly. There were 63 participants who I passed the study out to, but some of those people didn't attend church, so I discarded their data. I first used the Concern for Appropriateness Scale in my online survey. This scale has been established as a scale that predicts conformity. It's statistically significant in predicting conformity, so I used that scale to measure that. I also use the Attitudes Toward Homosexuality Scale, which, as you can gather, predicts attitudes toward individuals who are gay and lesbian. And I also established a Church Attitudes Scale. And this scale had items that measured the participants' attitudes, churches' attitudes toward gays and lesbians, as well as whether or not the participants agreed with their churches. All of these scales are measured on a Likert scale. The Concern for Appropriateness was a 1 to 6 Likert scale, 6 being strongly agree and 1 being strongly disagree. And the Attitudes Toward Homosexuality Scale and the Church Attitudes Scale were on a 1 to 7 Likert scale. I ran a multiple layer regression for my study and got a statistically significant interaction with a p-value of 0.05. However, with just looking at this data, it was a little confusing, and I had to dig deeper and analyze more to understand what the exact relationship was. So I first separated higher conformers from lower conformers. So those who scored higher, had higher average on the Concern for Appropriateness Scale, I separated from the lower scores. I then separated positive church attitudes and negative church attitudes in each group. So we have the higher conformers who attended positive churches and negative churches, as well as for lower conformers. I then averaged the individual attitude scale toward gays and lesbians, So I had high conformers, individual scores who attended positive churches, high conformers who attended negative churches, individual score, and the same for lower conformity. In order to understand this data, I placed it on a graph for us to look at. On the x-axis, we have the church attitudes with moving right, more positive attitudes. And on the y-axis, we have the attitudes toward homosexuality average, or the individual attitudes toward gays and lesbians, with the higher score being a more positive attitude. For higher conformers, those who attended negative churches, so the number on the left, had an individual score toward gays and lesbians of 4.25. And the high conformers who attended positive churches had an individual score of 4.68. And this makes sense. Higher conformers who attended negative churches had more negative attitudes than higher conformers who attended positive churches. Now here is where the interesting data comes in. A difference in the lower conformers. So the lower conformers who attended more negative churches actually had more negative attitudes than the higher conformers. And the lower conformers who attended churches with more positive attitudes actually had more positive attitudes than the higher conformers did. So what does this mean? First, according to my research, we know that there is an interaction between conformity and church beliefs. This interaction is a significant predictor of individual attitudes toward those who are gay and lesbian. But why do low conformers conform more to their church attitudes than higher conformers? Well, according to the second hypothesis, which was confirmed in the study, higher conformers were less likely to conform than to their church attitudes and adopt their beliefs than lower conformers. I suspect that this could be because higher conformers are more willing to listen to outside attitudes. As a higher conformer, you listen to more, you hear more attitudes than just your church. You have friends, coworkers, the media, especially with this being a hot topic in the media. We're constantly hearing about cases of discrimination, especially with the Trump administration. There's been a lot of changes with policies and proposing policies. So with that in mind, that could be a potential reason why higher conformers are less likely to conform. Furthermore, lower conformers may actually be more willing to adopt their church attitudes in order to defy societal views. As of recently, consistent church-going Christians are only making up about 1/3 of the population. While most of the United States would identify as Christian, about 30% are actually actively attending church. So because active churchgoers are becoming a minority in the United States, these lower conformers may want to defy cultural secular norms and cultural and secular views and hold stronger to their church ideas. So what does this mean about improving attitudes? Because knowing research about attitudes doesn't really mean anything if we're not going to do something with it. So I propose that addressing higher conformers who have negative attitudes may be more beneficial in dialoguing with them and may have a better outcome in improving their attitudes because lower conformers may not listen as well. So we know what the predictors of positive attitudes are, such as attributing same-sex attraction as a biological cause, as well as knowing someone who is gay and lesbian. So dialoguing with these higher conformers about these topics could be a potential way to improve attitudes toward gays and lesbians. Any questions?
Questions?
Right.
I know you were focusing on gays and lesbians. Do you think anything would change if you added bisexuals?
Bisexuals, I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure on if there's more segregated data between individuals who are gay, like measuring attitudes toward gays and lesbians as to bisexuals. I know that a lot of the research I was reading focuses just on LGBTQ, so encompasses everyone. I think that for Christians, if you added transgenders into the mix, that would completely change the data because that is a topic in the church that people do not know how to address still. And it's very confusing for Christians. So gays and lesbians, that has been something that has been already established in our culture for a long time. With more individuals coming out as trans, as talking about it more in media, I think that would change the data a lot more.
You mentioned that high conformers are exposed to more information or different types of information. Is that right?
I didn't say that. I said that they might be more willing to listen to that information because they're higher conformers.
Okay, can you explain that to me? Why would they be more likely to listen to information?
So I was speculating that higher conformers, just because they have a higher tendency to conform, So people conform because they want to gain something from the group that they're around, like social gain, whether it be status or being included in that group. So people with a higher tendency to conform may be more willing to listen to outside attitudes from the church because they want to be part of the other groups that they're in.
But not, what about, wouldn't they want to be part of the group, the church itself?
Correct. And it's difficult because, let me think this through. Faith is an essential part in a lot of people's lives, and if people are identifying as Christians, faith is important. So there's a possibility that the faith aspect might look different in these individuals that I measured. So you might think that higher conformers would want to focus on their church too because they're higher conforming, but conformity may be stronger, like their tendency to conform may be stronger, so that means they focus on other attitudes. I don't know if I'm answering your question. Okay.
It kind of sounds, this might touch on your question a bit, it kind of sounds like there almost seems to be like a threshold for conformity. And for the low, and it's completely counterintuitive, so I keep getting it mixed up in my mind. But for the low conformers, only the church reaches that sort of threshold, right? Where they have like a high threshold before they're like, I want to fit in. So only the church kind of like goes up on that, and that's why it has that larger influence. For the higher conformers, they actually have a lower threshold, so they'll conform to a lot of other things, and it'll kind of even it out. Does that mean, though, that for the low conforming individuals, would that say that only their church would then be a way of changing their attitudes? Would that be fair?
Yeah, I would say so. Because if they're unwilling to listen to other attitudes outside of their church, which is what I was speculating, I think in order to improve their attitudes, focusing on the church's ideas might be a better way to approach that conversation with them.
Okay, so in that case, any sort of media push or sensitivity training in schools or anything like that, you would predict that to be ineffective for that group?
Maybe, or if it was coming from Christians, like if it was a Christian school, Christians coming, maybe. But if they're focusing more on the Christian attitudes, that might be the better influencer of attitudes.
But just in relation to conformity or non-conformity, the non-conformist is going to take a lot of different things and think it through, whereas the conformist, whether he's conforming to his religion or conforming to the larger group of everybody, he just wants to be like more people.
According to this research, that's what I'm speculating.
So if what Dr. Yurichevich was saying, if schools and social media is ineffective, wouldn't the best people to handle this would be the churches themselves?
Yeah.
To influence?
I would say so. And I also think that if the negative attitudes are coming from the churches, they should take responsibility in working toward improving those attitudes. Because I'm sure that there are churches, for example, I was discussing this with my own pastor, who supports legal rights for individuals who identify as gay and lesbian, has a lesbian sister-in-law. It may have other different views that would differ from that, but he is very welcoming. However, there are individuals at my church that I know of who are homophobic. So there's always that discrepancy too, where the church's views might be positive, but the people attending the church might be negative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just from your personal point of view, this is going to be a big question. How do you think the churches could change their conformity? How do you think that they could influence it from your personal opinion?
Perspective? I think that gets into a lot of theology too. I think in general sometimes this topic is hard to attack because we're using scientific methods to measure theological attitudes. When science focuses on the physical world and theology focuses on the unseen world. So, in my personal opinion, I think that the contact hypothesis is really important. How can we hate someone if we don't know anything about them? So I think that knowing individuals who are gay and lesbian or identify as LGBTQ would be really important, and not being afraid. People are afraid of what they don't know and what they don't understand. For example, a transgender woman just started attending my church. I was just talking about this with my pastor's wife yesterday because we haven't had someone who's trans come to our church before. And there's a lot of people who are pursuing a relationship with her and building a relationship with her, and there's also a ton of people who are avoiding her because they have no idea how to address the topic. So I think that contact hypothesis is super important, as well as I think a lot of Christians also, well, research has shown too that they believe that homosexuality is a choice, that same-sex attraction is a choice, and it's clearly not. I like the color blue. I can't control that I like that. So I think dialoguing with people about that too, and knowing what the positive predictors are, if the church could address that with the congregations, that could also be a good way of improving attitudes.
And then just one more quick question. We're talking about the Christian religion and religious. Did we look at other religions also?
I did not. I only did Christians.
All right, so that wraps it up. So how about a hand for all of our speakers? And that concludes the conference. So thank you so much for everybody that attended. Thanks for our speakers, and have a wonderful weekend.